Hey, and welcome to our latest conversation on YouTube about writers and writing. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Mark Ward. Hey, Mark, how's it going? Thanks.
Hello, hey Andrew, thanks for having me.
Great. Yeah, thanks for joining. So just say a few words of introduction about Mark to start off with. Mark Ward is the author of the chapbooks Circumference from Finishing Line Press and Carcass from Seven Kitchens Press. I picked up a copy of Carcass actually. It's a really cool piece. Some really nice work in there. He's also the author of Hike from Bear Creek Press and the online Choose Your Own Adventure sonnet Faultlines from Voidspace. His latest work also is a full-length collection, Nightlight. I just picked up my copy there in the last couple of days, so I'm still getting into it. So get a good image of it there. Yeah. And his poems have featured and I should say Nightlight is from Salmon Press from this year. His poems have featured in the Irish Times, the Irish Independent, Poetry Ireland Review, Banshee, Crannóg, Southword, Skylight 47, The Honest Ulsterman, Ropes, 14 poems, Softblow, and many more, as well as anthologies, the most recent which was Queering the Green, post-2000 Queer Irish Poetry. He was highly commended in the 2019 and 2022 Patrick Kavanagh Poetry Awards, and in 2020 was shortlisted for the Cúirt New Writing Prize and selected for Poetry Ireland's Introduction Series. In 2021 and 2022, he was awarded bursaries from the Arts Council of Ireland, and he's recorded poems for RTÉ Radio 1's Arena and Poetry Programme, Lyric FM's Poetry File, and the podcast Words Lightly Spoken. He is also the founding editor of Impossible Archetype, an international journal of LGBTQ plus poetry, now in its 7th year. So, Mark, great to have you on. Fantastic CV there over.
Thank you so much. That's the first time I've heard it read out, and I'm like, God, that's long. I need to cut that. I need to make it shorter.
That's all right.
It's way too long to read out.
It's always the thing about I suppose the perceived length is always different, I suppose, kind of in writing when you're kind of reading something out.
But they're very rare. They're very rarely read out. They're more just like on a page, so it's very different. You kind of shove everything in on a page. You go, look at all the things I've done.
So I suppose with these conversations, we do like to I usually start off with people telling us about their latest work. So I guess you're fresh off the launch of Nightlight. So great.
Yeah, so
beautiful cover. Sorry, it might not be coming up very well. Just I know
it is dark.
But
yeah, no, it's coming up on your one. Well, yeah, no,
okay, I've got a bit of light coming onto it there. Yeah, so
the writer Matthew Bryce, he's a UK prose writer, kind of spec fic like yourself as well. He's also a graphic designer, and he did the cover for this and Carcass and Circumference. So he's done a lot of my covers, and it is absolutely beautiful. This is my first collection, so I was saying to you earlier before we started recording, I finished it in 2019, and because of publishing and the pandemic, it's taken a while to come out. So it's a kind of strange thing. I'm kind of getting reacquainted with it at the moment. But yeah, it's a very nice experience to finally have to fulfill my 12-year-old dream of having my first book in my hands, which is quite lovely. And Salmon have been lovely, and it's just starting its journey out in the world. It's literally been out for a couple of weeks, so I've been going around and going into bookshops and signing my book, and I found it in Hodges Figgis, and I hadn't requested it or anything, and they just bought it of their own accord, and I felt like I was a big writer for the first time. So yeah.
Say it again. Sorry, you felt like
I went into Hodges Figgis and they had it, and I had contacted them, and they just had it on their shelves, and I felt like a real writer. I hadn't been like, please stop my book, please buy my book or anything like that. But it has been going well. People are picking it up and reading it, and I'm getting nice messages about it. The next thing will be reviews, I suppose, but they take some time.
Hodges Figgis do a great book launch. Yeah, I've been to a couple of book launches there. Really nice. Really nice bookshop in the city centre of Dublin. Yeah, if any international people are listening, it's well worth checking out if you're in Dublin. And I suppose in terms of the initial response just from people in your circle? I know it's got some great reviews, like on the cover. Are there particular responses that have stuck with you from just the initial reaction?
Um, Jessica Traynor, who launched the book, said some lovely things about it at the launch, and I kind of worried that being written such a while ago, and essentially I'm kind of quite a different poet now than I was when I wrote this, that it would hold up, but I've been assured that it has, which is kind of lovely. Um, Jessica was saying it works really well as a book and that it held up really well. So yeah, no, it's been really nice that people have really positive. I don't know, maybe people have terrible things to say about it, but they're just not telling. And that's fine. They should continue to not tell me. But no, it's been really nice, and yeah, no, it's, as I said, it's just kind of starting a journey. It's been out for a matter of weeks, so we shall see where it goes.
Great, great. Yeah, so it does. I guess that it does speak to how kind of the publishing world kind of does move quite slowly, I guess, in terms of the yeah, it's just a long process, yeah, to from writing something to actually getting it out in the world, particularly to holding a physical copy in your hand that you can, yeah, you can,
Particularly, I find with Irish publishers, like even big publishers like Salmon, like they're very small companies. There's a small number of people involved, as far as I'm aware. A lot of well-known Irish presses seem to be like three people in an office. You know what I mean? It's not like
mm,
the big five of Blue Three or whatever. Um,
yeah,
so I think it's a lot more of an achievement as well. But there's a lot more to do when there's just two or three of you doing it. And I think of people like John and Lisa from Dira, or Pat and Raffaella from Deadless, and Jesse and Siobhan from Salmon. And just the amount of work they put out is frankly astonishing, given the limited amount of people involved.
yeah. I think I suppose that speaks to the importance of supporting like smaller presses as well, given the kind of limited kind of resources they have available.
Yeah,
But I mean, you mentioned as well you've had some support from the Arts Council of Ireland, which is great to see.
yeah,
And they do come up like at
true.
launches, like from smaller presses and things. Like I was at one a book launch in Hodges Vegas a couple of weeks back, and it was like New Ireland, who were, they're not the small. I mean, they're not the smallest
No,
rest of the world, but I mean, I think the help they get is very important too.
yeah,
Um,
no, the help that everyone gets from the Arts Council, because so I know Salmon gets help from the Arts Council, and just publishing wouldn't really exist in Ireland without it. And also, like I was very lucky to get a grant, and it gave me time to write in my second section and write a pamphlet, take time away from work and focus on the writing practice, as they call it. And it's a huge opportunity that I'm incredibly lucky to get. Yeah.
yeah. And I suppose, yeah, speaking of the publishing world, like I guess more broadly, and yeah, like you say, I suppose there's so much effort kind of put into putting something out there. I suppose with this series of conversation,
Mm,
this series, this is a plural of series. Yeah, so I'd like to talk about unpublished work in particular.
yeah.
And like, is there work that you previously tried to get published, but weren't able to do so, or were there kind of false starts along the way where you were trying to get something out into the world and you weren't kind of it wasn't really happening, like.
The early version of this was a different book altogether. This was called How to Live the Life's Tracks, which is a very didactic. I don't know. It's just not as interesting as like, but it had older work in it, and it was like the best book I could make at the time. And it wasn't as good. It just wasn't as good. And I sent it out, I think, a bit too early. Said no, thankfully. And I went back to the drawing board and spent more time and worked it into Nightlight. I had a mentorship with through Words Ireland with Nell Regan, and we spent a year basically back and forth working on the poems in this book, and really concentratedly working on poems So it transformed the book. So that book, How to Live a Life of Cracks, is definitely unpublished. But there's heaps of stuff I have unpublished. There's I have a folder on my computer called Not for Publication, which is poems that are just a bit too personal, I suppose. Not that they're too personal, but like I don't like to write about other people or other people's things. And if I kind of find that I've veered into that, I kind of won't publish it because it's not my story to talk about, if that makes sense. Or not that I'm telling people's tales, but I'm just very, I'd be very, and I don't tell people's tales, but I'm just very overly cautious about. I don't want to upset anybody. I'm far too nice. I don't want to upset anybody about anything I publish. Um, Beyond that, I suppose I would have, in terms of unpublished work, I would have. I'm sure you've had similar experiences with stories. I would have poems that I would write. I would think they were finished, and then 6 months later, I would write something else, and I'd go, "Oh, that was a draft for what I had written now," and I didn't realize until I wrote the succeeding version that that was a draft. So that would be something I wouldn't publish. But in the interim, I would have thought
Okay.
that was a finished piece, and it was only when I wrote the eventual final poem or final story that I'd be like, oh, that was just a sketch, essentially. So it's
Okay.
kind of rendered unpublishable by its successor.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's kind of found new life in another piece. Like
yeah, and sometimes things are sometimes things get cannibalized. Sometimes like there's like a tip in poetry that I don't do that often, but it's quite a good one, which is like you're having trouble with a poem, take the best line and put it in a new poem. And I've done that before, and it's resulted in quite different work. But obviously, then you won't publish that. There's a poem in this which I always wanted to get published, and I tried for a really long time, and I was really proud of it, called Trick. And I always thought it would get published, and it never did. So it's just published for the first time in this book now.
Great. I have read that one. Yeah, and it's very it's particularly rhythmic, or it feels quite
yeah. I think this first book is definitely kind of more shows the kind of influence of spoken word that had on me at the time. I spent a lot of my I spent a whole period going to like poetry slams and feeling very out of place and uncomfortable and being like, oh, I don't think I can do this. But it kind of seeped into my writing at the time. So things like that, or like Blue Boy in Carcass, that long spoken word piece, that whole came out of being involved in that scene. But yeah, Trick, Trick, I think it was purely because I think it was a bit too sexual, perhaps, for people. I don't know.
Have you sorry, have you performed, have you actually performed Trick live?
Oh yeah, I've read Trick live before,
Okay,
but in terms of getting it published in a journal, I found it quite it just remained unpublished until the book. But I also think that's quite nice as well to have one or two little unpublished surprises. I try to be like one of those old school poets where and it's a weird thing because you talk about unpublished work. Some poetry presses now will actually request that half of the work in a collection be unpublished.
Okay.
They don't want the majority of it to have been out in individual journals and read by other people. Whereas historically, going back to olden times, you would put out one slim volume every 10 years, and every single poem would be published individually. And then that's where the collection would come from. It would be literally collected of all the stuff you have published. So yeah, I think it's fascinating, that kind of shift towards wanting more unpublished work, because it kind of goes against what the advice is for kind of working poets, where it's like you need to build up a resume of credits and of magazine publications. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's yeah, I don't really work in poetry. Like I read poetry and enjoy it, but I do feel more comfortable kind of writing prose. Yeah, but it's Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if that's how things kind of change over time in poetry publishing. Yeah.
It'd be very unusual, I'm sure, even in stories, if you had a short story collection of half of it was unpublished work, unless you were a big, a name bringing out a short story collection as a corollary kind of
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying. I do read. I've read a few short story collections over the last few years, and you would see, they'd be appearing in different space or being published previously. Yeah.
thing.
Um. Yeah.
The press is just trying to claim ownership over it. But yeah,
Yeah.
apart from that, then like unpublished stuff. I mean, obviously bad stuff, bad, terrible poems that that would consist of a lot of the stuff that just would not be published. And unfortunately, a couple of them sneak through, and you publish them individually, and you're like, oh God, why did I publish that? That was a bad idea. But then you have the difference between, I suppose, unpublished work and like particularly for poets, like collected work. Like, because I was thinking about the question, and like as I think as a poet, even if you don't want it in your head, you're always working towards like the collected poems for like when you're 80, and you're like, well, I may have published that poem, but I wouldn't collect. So I think that's a different version of publishing and unpublishing as well. It's like, yes, let's just let that fade into the ether, you know?
I suppose it's easy to be quite hard on one's own work, like particularly if it's something a bit like raw, etc., or personal to oneself. I suppose there can just be a sense of, besides the usual kind of, stuff you can do, criticism you can apply to yourself about technical stuff. There might also be it's combined with there might be some sense of embarrassment or exposure. So it hits a lot harder than, if somebody else is writing about, some of their own stuff, it's never going to kind of hit you at the same visceral level, I guess.
But it's a cliche at this point, but somebody pointed out to me recently, and it is a cliche. Once you publish it, it's not yours anymore. It's not for you. It hasn't been for you in a while, and it's for people to look at. And just need to kind of get over yourself and your feelings, up and down about it, and just let it be. And like I kind of made a resolution to myself with this because I had it for such a long time that I could have tinkered it to death. I could have changed it, and I didn't change anything. I didn't change anything from when it was accepted. And I know other people have literally revised the book up until the publication date, and I was like, that would just drive me mad. I couldn't. I started a new book instead. That's what I did.
Okay.
But yeah. So I think that's kind of why there's you talk about published work. That's why I kind of just like start because the idea of just tinkering drive me mad.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I imagine that could be a bit nerve-wracking. I imagine publishers don't like that as well if they're, if they have to kind of proofread whatever the last version is. Right? They send it to the presses for the printing presses. Yeah, yeah. And just on that, yeah, was there anything else? I mean, yeah, no need to go into specifics about individual poems or whatever, but like, is there anything else you wanted to say about just, I suppose that's not publishing something because you feel it's somebody else's story to tell, or you might feel it might, um, at a general level, are there other thoughts you had about that, or?
Well, I mean, again, I think I maybe misspoke when I said it's someone else's story to tell. Like in that,
Yeah,
I wouldn't write about someone's story per se, but like I get very funny about kind of when I'm writing about people in my life. I don't want to upset them. Like my
yeah,
second book, I went through my second collection, which I finished. I went through a really big breakup of a marriage, and I ended up writing a couple of poems about that. But I was
yeah,
very resolute that um, they were about me from my perspective, and I didn't deal with my ex's stuff, or
yeah,
because I can't write about his stuff. So I
yeah.
tried to keep it like that. I tried to keep it to what I have control over. So I think that's the fairest way of doing it, really.
Yeah, I mean, my own writing, I write very much fictitious characters. Like the characters aren't really based on,
Mm.
individual characters based on any particular person. Like so, Because yeah, I
and
can see it being quite fraught. Like if you're
that's quite interesting as well, because the assumption with poets is that everything is real, which is rubbish. For quite
yeah,
frankly, you know, there's a lot
yeah,
of fiction in this book, you know, and there's a
yeah,
lot of real stuff in this book, but I will never tell you which is which because that's boring. But
yeah.
yeah, and particularly with the poetic eye, they assume absolutely everything about you, which
It's
is kind of,
autobiographical. Yeah,
yeah, kind of reductive, really. But it's yeah. I wonder what my family actually think of the book. That's
yeah.
quite
I mean,
interesting.
it's bad enough with novels, I'm sure, yeah. But it does, yeah, I think, yeah, I think the point with poetry, which is, I mean, it's a different, you know, at the end, you know, it's a different format. It doesn't mean it has to be more autobiographical necessarily than,
But
um,
with you writing fiction, then do you get the opposite, where you get people kind of seeing themselves in something and thinking they've been thinly veiled, perhaps, and thinking that,
possibly, yeah. I don't think it's ever happened. I don't think it's specifically happened where someone was really convinced. Someone was so convinced that they were being, you know, this was a thinly veiled story about them that they that they sort of accused me of such. But yeah,
I think I just worry about things. I remember I did write something about somebody, and uh I showed a family member, and they were like, "Mark, I wouldn't even know it was about a person. Never mind about that person." I was like, "Oh, fair enough." So, but
yeah,
I don't know. One of my best friends just he's very kind of, he would say, like my poetry mentor, he would say, "Publish, be damned." It's just like just publish everything. Just publish everything. Publish and be damned.
sure. And yeah, I mean, do you have future plans then for your writing, like new kind of projects or?
Yeah, no, I absolutely still going. I've finished the second collection, so I'm just kind of waiting for Nightlight to have its moment, and then I will start trying to get that out of the world. And I have finished. I've been working on a pamphlet of poems which are inspired by queer painters and their paintings. So it's called Masters. So it's like a bunch of response poems about painters and their subjects and the kind of power dynamics that are implicit in that. And then, really weirdly, in the past year or so, I've started to write weird short stories. Um, so I've been writing very odd, dark, kind of speculative short stories. I was working towards a short story collection, and publisher that I was planning to do it with has since gone bust. So I'm a bit up in the air now in regards to that. But yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of flexing a new muscle. I really have a lot of confidence in my writing of prose. Until a couple of years ago, I secretly always wanted to be a novelist. Um, but didn't really have the confidence. I wrote some terrible novels in my teenage years that should be burned. But yeah, so I'm kind of working on short stories, and I wrote a couple of poems recently, which kind of feel like something new, and I always feel that that's something to kind of follow. So I think that might be the start of a new collection, like some lynch poles of kind of a new collection. So that'll take a few years anyway, but I'm just kind of following all that. And then apart from that, I'm what I'm going to be doing for the rest of today is I'm typesetting the new issue of the Possible Archetype, which is my
Oh,
poetry
cool.
journal. So that's what I'll be doing all of my Sunday is just typesetting all the poems, um,
Okay.
and having a nervous
Do you want to
breakdown.
plug do you want to plug a few things that are going on in the latest issue or?
Yeah, no, there's all kinds of wonderful. We have Ed Madden. I have it literally here on the ground beside me. I was ordering it in bed last night, which I find that's a fascinating process that I don't know if people talk about that much. Like, have you ordered stuff into collections and stuff like that, like, or ordering short stories? I love it. It's like conducting a symphony, because like I ordered this into an order. There's no rhyme or reason to it. I just find it's a very instinctive thing.
Mm,
I just it's like, oh yeah, I'll beside that. Why? I don't know. Because I mean, it's more involved, I think, when it's a collection of your own.
I guess, yeah, you alluded to how people were saying Bears, the first poem in Nightlight should be the first poem. Like,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
initially it wasn't, but other people said to you that it should appear as the first poem.
I think with this one, I mean, in terms of ordering the collection, it's very much, I try and make it work individually, but also like a coherent to me narrative, as if the whole thing was one character and you could read it like a book. I remember saying that to my ex. I was like, read it like it's a novel, and he was like, but it's not a novel. You can't make it be a novel. I was like, shh, just read it like it's a novel. But yeah, no, I have some fabulous names. I have uh Ed Madden is opening it. I have regulars like Jeff Mann and Raymond Luxack. I have the great gay poet and academic Gregory Woods from the UK in it, and lots of kind of up and coming Irish writers. And what I like about the journal is that it's very kind of international. It doesn't, we have kind of Irish writers, but we get people from all over. I think just purely because it's focused as a LGBTQ plus journal.
Great.
But yeah, so that's what I'll be doing this summer.
Cool. Fantastic. Any other future projects you'd like to give a shout out about, or?
Oh yes, the thing you mentioned in my blurb, the online Faultlines. Faultlines is an online choose your own adventure sonnet which you can play online, and it's half sonnet, half computer game. So every couplet you make a choice and the poem goes a different way. But that will be getting a print version this year, so it'll be done like an actual choose your own adventure book. You remember those from your childhood?
I do remember them. Yes, yeah, from childhood. Yeah. That's great.
So it'll be a choose your own adventure sonnet, and it's very weird and strange. So that'll be coming out as a print book later this year. So I've been typesetting that, so I'm having now it's breakdown, but it's done, and yeah, I'm very excited. I'm very excited for that.
That does sound. I mean, that sounds like really quite innovative in terms of format. So yeah, that definitely sounds really cool.
I know that press are really cool. Their whole remit is every single piece they publish, every single issue, it has to be interactive. So everything is completely interactive. So it results in some fascinating work.
Cool. And would you, I suppose, before we wrap up, would you like to read one of your poems? Or
yeah, absolutely.
One that you think is, if there's one that you're kind of used to reading, one that you, like.
Yeah, I this is my go-to one. I always read this one. It's actually I keep telling the story, which I was a little secret for me. That's actually where the phrase "nightlight" comes from. The last word in first line is light, and the last word in the last line is magic. That's the secret word "nightlight" because there's no title poem in the book. It's after 1970s poet John Wiener's, and it's a form called a terminal, where you take the last word of each line and match it up with his, but write new lines to fill in. And it's called A Poem for Actors, after John Wiener's. The room is filled with light, our bodies heaving with air. We are present in a way no one understands the lives we flee from. Documenting impermanence is a form of strength. This palmed love is codified among the slats where we distill into performance. The lines alive, transformed in utterance from the author's burden, the audience's expectation. What this means is our translucence, the utter destruction of days. For this is what we are made for. That moment of disappearance where we are done with pretending we are not the dawn, backlighting the empty stage, the applause. Now we are your disbelief, your pause at our encroaching night. Thank you.
Great. So yeah, exciting times now that the book is out, and it's great. It's great timing you were able to join us for this conversation today, so soon after the book was launched.
Thank you for having me, and it's lovely to actually chat to you in the virtual flesh, because we chat all the time by Twitter. So it's nice to see you face to virtual face.
Death to Videodrome.
Indeed.
And that bombshell.
Indeed.
Right, thanks very much for joining, Mark. I'll stop the recording now, but yeah, thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks, Andrew.
Just okay.